Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining me today. Today we're going to be talking about Welcome to Assessment 101. My name is Maddie, so thank you again for tuning in. Today we're going to talk about all things assessment. First, starting off with 5 strategies for an effective assessment, and then 2 being we're going to look at 3 different technology ideas that you can use to incorporate assessment in your classroom. So first, starting off with some strategies for effective assessment. When you are first looking at giving an assessment to your students, the first thing you need to decide is if this is going to be a formative assessment or if this is going to be a summative assessment. I have quite a few different items here that compare and contrast a formative assessment to a summative assessment, but essentially the biggest difference between a formative assessment and a summative assessment is the stakes of that assessment. So typically formative assessments are done low stakes, not graded, student-centered. You're really looking at the progress that the student is making, what things that they still need help on, what items they seem to understand quite clearly. Formative assessment really focuses on the student itself. So you're engaging the student in their own learning. You're building onto your classroom culture that mistakes are okay. And we want to be able to make mistakes so we can learn and grow from them. So the whole point of a formative assessment is you're looking at progress. This can be done in many different ways. It can be more formal in the sense of like a worksheet, practice problems, quiz, or maybe less formal in just a conversation, observing their work, things like that. Whereas a summative assessment is very much more high stakes. You're looking at the end product of what the student has learned. It typically is graded, very teacher-centered. I want to see in what way you were able to master this concept, these skills, these standards. Typically, they're not revisable and they're less beneficial for the students in the aspect of the student can't go back and modify their work. These summative scores are more beneficial for teachers, administration, and community members alike in the fact that you're seeing at the end what was the student able to understand from our lesson. And then, of course, in the middle here, we have a few different things that they have in common. Obviously, both give us some data collection, which is very useful to teachers. So that's strategy number 1 here. Strategy number 2, when you're looking at assessment, in order to have an effective assessment, you need to make sure that you are selecting the correct problem type. So what kind of problems are you trying to give to your student? The biggest key in trying to figure out what you are giving to your student is that your problems that you are picking need to be reflective of your purpose. What do you want to see from your students? What do you want to understand that your students are able to do. So it kind of gets broken down into 3 categories. A selected response being a multiple choice, true, false, matching, or fill in the blank. There are pros and cons with a lot of these selected response. You really need to work for the struggles of guessing. So you want to make sure that you are giving students effective problem-solving strategies when you are doing a selected response, understanding that some of the scores could be skewed if they just limit themselves to guessing. Then you have a written response. Written response can be in many different forms. You can do a short answer, maybe a few sentences, maybe a few paragraphs, or an extended response. You're looking for an essay style. Again, really reflective on what your purpose is with this assessment. Then you also have a performance assessment. This can be a project or a presentation. So maybe we learned all of these concepts together, so now take these concepts and build something, more like a hands-on model, or take these concepts and reteach them to me. This can be in the form of like a PowerPoint, a presentation, whatever that may be. You're kind of at this point of a performance assessment, you're seeing what the students know by taking those concepts and applying it to something bigger. Strategy number 3, in effective assessment, you need to have a well-written rubric. So here we're talking about some qualities of a good rubric. It's important with a rubric that you are creating it well, but then also presenting it to the students so they know how they are being graded. And not necessarily graded in the sense of an official grade, but how they're being scored and what they're being evaluated on. So some qualities of a good rubric include 1, deciding what you are grading. So looking again at what is your purpose, what is your goal, what is your objective, what are you trying to see that the students are able to do. And then 2, deciding if it's going to be analytical or holistic. Analytical rubrics are looking at each individual component of the assignment separately and then giving them a score or a grade on each of those items, whereas a holistic rubric is looking at the general overall quality of the entire assignment together with one final grade. So depending on what your assignment is, what your problems are that we selected at this point, what are you looking for? Are you looking for multiple standards within one assignment? Maybe you're looking at more analytical. Or is your whole assignment based on one standard? Okay, give them one grade. This is where you're at with that standard. So it really depends on what you are using your assessment for. 3, reasonable number of performance levels. Typically, you'll see a rubric like a 1 through 4, 0 through 4, 0 through 2, even if you want to do a 0, 1, or 2. It really just depends on what your assessment looks like and what you are looking for. Once you decide how many performance levels you are going to have, then within each of those performance levels, you need to write explicit outcomes. So what does a 4 look like in this category compared to what does a 3 look like? Making sure the language is very clear and detailed. It's important that none of the language here is ambiguous or vague, because you want to make sure the student is able to look at their work, look at the rubric, and understand why they got the score the way they did. Also, as a teacher, being the one using this rubric to grade the student work, you want to make sure there is no bias in a score. A 3 should be a 3 for every single assignment and every single student response if they're giving the same quality of work. Next strategy that we're going to look at for effective assessment is feedback. Feedback is something that I feel like a lot of teachers struggle with because they want to make sure that they're giving good feedback, but also making sure that they have time in their day to also plan lessons or to take meetings or things like that. So I feel like feedback is something that teachers really struggle with. So I want to give a general overview of ways that you could give feedback because it's not just in one way. So good feedback in itself is timely, personalized, and detailed. You want to make sure that feedback on an assignment is getting back to a student as soon as possible. So as those same concepts are still active in their mind, they can look at the feedback that you have given them and then use that onto the next assignment. If you're giving feedback maybe 2 weeks past the point of the assignment, you may have already moved on to something else, so it's not as fresh in their brain to be able to make those adjustments. Maybe you're giving feedback on a concept that constantly builds. You want to make sure that you're giving that feedback in a timely manner so that they're building on a strong foundation. Also personalized. You want to make sure that you are writing feedback to the students or giving feedback to the students in a way that is personalized to what they gave to you. So you're looking at their specific problem. Where is the mistake? Where is the misconception? Or where did they do well? You want to make sure that you're also giving them compliments to their work. I love that you did this piece well, which is personal to that student and not necessarily going to be the same for all students. And then detailed, of course, being very clear in what was good, what do we need to work on, and what can you do to better yourself and your work in the classroom. Feedback isn't always just given in a written word sort of way. You can use rubrics like we talked about in the last slide, verbal comments, so just walking around being like, oh, good job, or why did you do this here, or what made you make this decision in this step of the problem, whatever that may be. But I also think the biggest way to give feedback to a student in the way that they really will take it in and listen is in a student conference. So talking with that student one-on-one, walking through the assignment, walking through their work, asking them guiding questions and giving them that personal time so they can see that you really care about what they're doing and their work. And then you're also ensuring that they're listening and they're taking in that feedback so they can make a change in the future. Last strategy we're going to be talking about for effective assessment is making sure that whatever assessment you are giving, you are focusing it around the student. You want to make sure that it's student-centered in a way that we can keep these students actively engaged in their own learning. In order for an assessment to be effective, we want to make sure the results we are getting are accurate. If a student is not giving their best effort, those results may not be accurate. So we want to have students engaged in their learning in order to give them good feedback and in order to help them continue to succeed. So some ideas to keep student motivation high in the classroom, even around effective assessment, is including some student choice. So maybe you are working on a specific concept and you have 3 different activities the students can choose from. making sure that all of those activities, of course, are assessing the same concept, same standard in the same way, but maybe they want to do a puzzle instead of doing a maze, instead of doing a worksheet, instead of doing an online activity. So you can have all of these different choices for students to do that are assessing the same standard, but you're giving them that freedom to show you how they can accomplish this standard, but in their own way. Students love the idea of being able to pick and have choices in such a typically structured environment. So they'll be more engaged in what they're doing because they had the choice in what they were able to do. Also, gamification, so talking about involving game-like features into the classroom or using games to enhance student learning. Students love games. They're at this age, they're still young and playful, and they want the opportunity to be involved in something that's maybe competitive or collaborative with their classmates that makes it seem like, oh, maybe this isn't school, maybe we're not learning, but they are actually learning through the game process. So it seems like something that maybe they would want to do on their own time, but incorporating those specific concepts into that. And then obviously student interest. The more you know about your students, the more you can gear their learning towards their specific lives. So if you know that, oh, I have this class of students and a lot of them like sports, well, maybe we can take our lesson and revolve it around a sports metaphor, a sports game, people in sports, like players in sports. So you're still teaching the concept to them, but in a way that it's geared towards their specific interest. If students know that you're listening to them about things that they like, and then you're offering them things that they like or related to things that they like, they're going to be more engaged to listen and interact with the materials. So those are the 5 strategies for effective assessment. There are plenty more, but these are the ones that stuck out to me in importance. And I think that there's a lot for us to learn through these 5 categories. We're going to be taking these 5 strategies and seeing what that looks like from technology based. So we're going to talk about 3 different tech tools that we can use for assessment. So the first tech tool that we're going to look at is ClassKick. This is actually the tool that we are using right now. If you are not familiar and you're like, oh, where is this page coming from? This is called ClassKick. So ClassKick is a tool that you can use in a variety of different ways. I've used it personally in my classroom for notes, even quizzes and tests, and sometimes projects. It's very similar to a PowerPoint, but it turns into something interactive. So me right now on my screen, you can see this. I'm kind of in an editing mode right now. You can see there's a lot of tools. I can move things around. I can change them. So as an educator, I can create an assignment and kind of look something like this. I create the assignment, then I can actually assign it to a specific set of students. You can link a roster directly from Google Classroom and assign it on Google Classroom so your students can see it. And then when you're looking at it from a student view, this is a student preview we can check out. At that point, they won't be able to actually modify or click on anything on this screen, but they can add to the base. So there's over here a drawing tool. You can draw on it. If they're taking notes, you can highlight. So this piece may be very important, so let's highlight that. They can add their own notes onto the screen using a text box. You can add images, you can change the font color, you can add your own audio. So if you want to respond to something without typing it out or drawing it out, you can talk through what you would do in the process. There's a lot of different tools here that are really helpful to a lot of different types of students. So using a tool like this in the form of, like I said, notes, quizzes, tests, students have the ability to play around on the screen, but also still be engaged in what you are trying to assess them on. So I really love this tool for a variety of reasons, but it gives the students so many options in how they want to respond. And it's also kind of fun to be able to draw and play. Also, thinking of this from a teacher point of view, you can do assignments on here where it gives the students immediate feedback or you a quick grade. So for example, if I wanted to create a problem, and I want to create a short answer, I can make this box here. And then on the side, I can add what acceptable answers would be. So say I want the answer to be 3. Anytime a student goes to this box and types in a 3, it's going to add a point if you want to assign a point value to it. Set points here at the bottom. So then when I look back at a finished piece of work, I can see quickly how many students got this right or how many students got this wrong. You can also add multiple acceptable answers if there's multiple. There's a multiple choice actual feature that you can add in. Let me scroll down here, get some room. Multiple choice. You can put in what you want the answers to be, how many answer choices you want, and also set the point value here. So there's a lot you can do with this to get some instant feedback, to give students some of that motivation, that play, that engaging, and also being able to use technology is exciting for the students to do and is different than typical handwritten notes. So this is one tech tool that I wanted to introduce you to today. Another tech tool that I want to talk about is assessments. Assessments is math specific, so if you don't teach math, this may not be the best resource for you, but for any math teachers out there, this is a fantastic resource. Some uses for this are practice, maybe some cool downs at the end of your lesson, immediate feedback for the students, and state test prep. So let's go ahead and take a look at this one. When you log into assessments, this is the home page here. You can just log in with a Google email. This also is directly linked to Google Classroom, so if you want to find it, you can go to this website, and if you wanted to assign it to students, you can do it via Google Classroom. And here is a bunch of different open source curriculum, so any math curriculum that is published, that is free to use, you can look at here. So there's a few examples of different curriculums here in different genres. Currently at my school, I use Open Up Resources, so I'm going to click on Open Up Resources. I currently teach grade 7, so I'm going to go to grade 7, and then here's all of the units that I teach. Maybe we're looking at measuring circles, so let's go to Unit 3. From here, you have assessments, and you have each individual lesson. So maybe we are on Lesson 5 today. Lesson 5, you can see here, I have practice problems, I have the student-facing task, which is the actual lesson itself, and then I have the cool down. So I can assign any of these problems that I want to my students just by clicking Assign and Assign to Class, and then I can pick any class that I have from my Google Classroom page. I can set it to release at a certain time, I can set it to be due at a certain time, and I can assign it that way. Once I assign it to my students, they open up that link on Google Classroom. It looks like this. They have all of these problems here, and I want them to answer the problems. So I'm going to read this question. What quantity, when added to -8, will give a sum of 0? As a student, maybe I'm going to try to answer this question, and maybe I think the answer is 7. So let's type in 7, submit answer. This little X means that I got the problem wrong. So you saw as soon as I submitted that answer, I got feedback. I'm like, okay, well, let me try this again, because I do have the opportunity to try it again. Maybe my answer is 8. Now I'll see that green check mark on there. That means I got it right, and now I can move on to the next problem. So students move through the problems. You can set it to where they move from top to bottom, or you can click around and answer them in any order. But once all of the problems are done, the students will have the ability to submit the assignment. Once the assignment is submitted, then me as a teacher, I have this thing called a data report. And this shows me all of my students lumped together and all of the problems that they did. So over here, I have how many of them completed the assignment. It looks like these two are close to finishing, this one not so much, so maybe I want to check in with that student. I can see the average scores on each of the problems for the classes. So clearly, we need to go over problem number 1 because only 6% got it correct. So maybe the next day in class, I'm going to go over problem number 1 before we even start on our day. That's how I'm using assessment to better drive learning in my classroom. But I can see from problem 2, we're at 83%, so maybe I don't have to go over that one. They seem to do pretty well on that one. So there's a lot of data that you can get here. So when I'm talking about using this feature, wrong slide. So when I'm talking about using assessments, this is giving me immediate feedback as a teacher, but also the student immediate feedback on what they need to work on. So this is fantastic for students and teachers alike. One more tech tool we're going to talk about today is Blooket. Maybe a lot of you guys are familiar with Blooket, but I don't know if you've used it in the way of actually collecting data. So we're going to talk about it a little bit. Blooket can be used as an effective assessment tool, but also can be used for free play. So if you have some time at the end of the class, there's a lot of different assignments and discovery sets that you can look at just to play around with. But you can also do it directly linked to any concepts that you are teaching. So for example, last week in summer school, we played multiply and divide integers. This is the data from all of the students that played. I say all, there's 7 of them, but my students that played, all from the problems that they played, I can see they got 70% correct, which is fantastic. I can see the breakdown of problem to problem. But then also I can see the breakdown of student to student. So this student who got number 1 on the leaderboard, 95% correct. From those problems, 38 were right, 2 were wrong. So I'm like, okay, this student's got it. But maybe I'm looking down here. Okay, this student here only got 8 correct and 20 wrong. Now I have data that shows me that I need to check in with this specific student because they seem to be struggling. So not only playing it for fun, but playing it to get some data. So if you haven't seen Blooket before, this is the website. As you can see, there's a bunch of resources already made, but you can also make your own. If you're looking for something specific like add integers, you can just type it in and any of these would work. So maybe I want to play this game specifically. I can preview the questions that are going to be asked to the students, and then I can host a game. There's a bunch of different game modes you can pick. My students absolutely love Crypto Hack. That seems to be their number 1 request. But each game kind of has its own rules and different battles that they can play to be competitive with each other. And then from here, I can host the game. The students log in with a code on the Blooket website, and then they can start playing. They can change their avatars. They can put nicknames if they want to. Students really love this because it is in the form of a game, that gamification piece that we were talking about, but also you're getting real live data from the students and they are practicing their skills. So it's nice to have it all together. So that's all I have for you guys today. I do have a list of references if any of these are interesting to you that you want to dive deeper in on. But thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you use some of these strategies.